Lena stood outside the towering office building, the crisp morning air biting at her skin as she adjusted her blazer. Her heart raced, each beat seeming louder than the last as she clutched her resume and tried to steady her breath. Today was the day. The job interview she had worked so hard for, the opportunity she had dreamed about for years. It was a prestigious company, a chance for her to finally step into the career she had always envisioned. But as she looked at the reflection of herself in the glass doors, she couldn't help but feel a sense of doubt creeping in. She glanced down at her hand, where the simple gold ring sat, her mother's ring. The one she had worn since her mother passed away a year ago. It was small, elegant, but to Lena, it was everything. A reminder of her mother's strength, kindness, and unwavering belief in her. It was a symbol of everything she had fought for to get to this point. She had always worn it to feel closer to her mother, especially in moments like this, when the stakes felt too high and her nerves threatened to take over. Lena took a deep breath and stepped into the building, walking through the lobby toward the elevator. The sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor echoed in the grand space, a stark contrast to the pounding in her chest. She pressed the button for the top floor, where the interview would take place. As the elevator ascended, her mind raced with questions. Would they like her? Would she make a good impression? Or would she fall short, just like she feared she might? The elevator doors opened, and she was greeted by a receptionist who led her to a sleek, glass-walled conference room. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw him, the man she would be interviewing with. Thomas Blake. The CEO of the company, a man known for his sharp mind and cutthroat business tactics. He was standing by the window, looking out over the city skyline, exuding an aura of power and control. The receptionist introduced her, and he turned to face her, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Lena tried to steady her nerves as she walked into the room, shaking his hand and taking a seat across from him. She couldn't help but notice how his gaze lingered for just a moment longer than necessary on her hand, where the ring gleamed in the light. She wasn't sure if it was the way he looked at her or the quiet intensity with which he studied her, but something about it made her uneasy. "So, Lena," Thomas said, his voice calm but firm. "Tell me a bit about yourself. Why do you want to work here?" Lena took a deep breath and began speaking, sharing her qualifications, her experience, and her passion for the industry. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Thomas wasn't fully listening. His eyes kept flicking to her hand, and for a moment, she could swear she saw a flicker of recognition, or something more, pass through his expression. It was quick, but it was there, and it sent a chill down her spine. She continued talking, but her thoughts began to wander. Why had he looked at her ring like that? Was it just her imagination, or was there something more? She didn't know much about Thomas Blake beyond his professional reputation, but she had heard rumors. Rumors of his past, of the connections he had, and the things he had lost along the way. Could it be that her mother's ring had some kind of significance to him? As the interview progressed, Lena couldn't help but feel more and more out of place. Thomas's questions became more pointed, more personal. They weren't just about her qualifications anymore. He was digging deeper, asking about her background, her family. And every time he glanced at her hand, she felt the tension in the room grow thicker. She tried to brush it off, focusing on the task at hand, but she couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Finally, after what felt like hours, Thomas leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her. "Lena," he said slowly, his voice low. "Where did you get that ring?" Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected that question. It's my mother's," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "She passed away last year, and it's the only thing I have left of her." Thomas didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked toward the window, his back to her. For a long moment, he was silent, his posture rigid as though he were deep in thought. Lena could feel her palms sweating as she waited for him to speak. What was going on? Why was he asking about the ring? Finally, he turned back to face her, his expression unreadable. "You have no idea, do you?" he said, his voice almost a whisper. Lena's mind raced. "What do you mean?" He took a step toward her, his gaze never leaving hers. "That ring. It's not just any ring. It belonged to someone, very important. Someone who vanished years ago. Someone I once knew very well." Lena felt a knot form in her stomach. This wasn't what she had expected at all. What was he talking about? Her mother had never mentioned anything like that. "Do you have any idea what kind of legacy your mother left behind?" Thomas continued, his voice now tinged with something else. Was it fear? Regret? "That ring isn't just a piece of jewelry, Lena. It's a key. A key to something much bigger than you can imagine." Lena's breath caught in her throat. She had heard whispers over the years about her mother's past, about things she had never fully understood. But this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. What was Thomas talking about? And how could a ring hold the answers to so many questions? Her mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place, but it was all too much, too fast. She had come here today for a job interview, not to uncover buried secrets. And yet, it seemed that her mother's past was about to catch up with her in ways she could never have anticipated. Thomas took a step closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "If you want to know the truth about your mother, Lena, you're going to have to be prepared for what comes next. This is only the beginning." Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She had come for a job, but now, it seemed she was caught in something much darker, much deeper than she ever expected. And all because of a simple ring she had worn for comfort, to hold on to the memory of her mother. The room seemed to close in around her as she tried to make sense of what Thomas had said. What did it all mean? Why had her mother kept this secret? And what did Thomas know that could change her life forever? As she sat there, staring at Thomas, the tension in the room thickening with every passing second, one thought kept repeating in her mind: she had no idea what she was walking into. But soon, she would. And when she did, nothing would ever be the same again. Lena sat frozen, her mind spinning in 1,000 directions. Thomas Blake's words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. The ring isn't just any ring. It's a key. A key to what? She couldn't wrap her head around it. Her mother had never mentioned anything about a ring being special, let alone being part of some larger, dangerous mystery. Lena had grown up hearing little about her mother's past. Her mom was always careful to keep her history a mystery. She had always been the quiet, reserved type, never opening up about her childhood or anything that had come before Lena was born. Lena had accepted this, even loved her mother more for the guarded way she kept her past. There was comfort in the silence, in the sense that her mother had survived and thrived without needing to share her past with anyone. But now, it was clear that there had been more to her mother's life than Lena had ever known. And Thomas Blake was the one to reveal it? The man who was supposed to decide whether or not she got the job. How had he known about the ring? Lena's fingers subconsciously tightened around her resume. No, this wasn't about the job anymore. This was something far bigger. Her heart began to pound faster as she stared at Thomas. His face was unreadable, a mask of calmness hiding the tension just beneath the surface. It was as though he was waiting for her to say something, but the words wouldn't come. He broke the silence, his voice low but direct. Your mother was involved in something dangerous. I never thought you'd end up with that ring, but here we are. He paused, his gaze flickering to her hand again, the gold ring reflecting the harsh fluorescent light of the office. Do you have any idea how many people are looking for that ring, Lena? How much power it holds? Lena's stomach lurched. You're saying my mom was involved in something illegal? Or, what exactly do you mean? Thomas hesitated, as if weighing whether he should continue, and then sighed, sinking back into his chair. I don't know the full story. Your mother was very good at keeping secrets. But what I do know is that she was involved with some people who, let's just say, don't have the best reputation. The ring you're wearing is a key to a very old, very dangerous network. Lena's mind whirled. What was he saying? This couldn't be real. Her mother, who had always worked hard, kept to herself, and did everything she could to protect Lena, was part of some criminal organization? The thought was almost too much to bear. But Thomas's serious tone and his piercing gaze told her that he wasn't lying. He was far too calm for someone who was making this up on the spot. He knew something. Lena could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. I don't understand, she managed, her voice trembling slightly. Why would my mom have been involved in something like this? And why would you be the one to tell me? Thomas leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, eyes never leaving hers. Because I've been looking for that ring for years. And your mother was the last person to have it before she disappeared. She took it from someone who wants it back at any cost. And now you're wearing it. Lena's mind was racing. So, are you saying that I'm in danger? Thomas studied her for a moment, his eyes calculating, then nodded slowly. Yes. But it's not just the people after the ring. There are others, people who would use that ring for a much bigger purpose. You have no idea what's at stake, Lena. That ring could change everything. Lena felt the color drain from her face as she glanced down at the simple gold band resting on her finger. It didn't seem possible that something so small, so unassuming, could hold so much power. Yet, here she was, sitting in front of a man who was clearly terrified of its implications. She wasn't sure whether to be more afraid of Thomas's words or the implications of her mother's secret life. Why are you telling me all this? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas's lips curled into a thin smile. Because now you're part of this, Lena. Whether you want to be or not. You walked into my office wearing that ring, and that means something. And now, you'll have to choose whether to go down this path, or leave it behind. But I warn you, it's not that simple. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the ring. It was as if the weight of her mother's hidden past had suddenly come crashing down on her, pulling her into a web of danger she didn't understand. She wasn't prepared for this. She had come to the interview to start a new chapter in her life, to finally escape the shadows of her past. But now it seemed as if her mother's legacy had followed her into the present, and it wasn't going to let her go without a fight. For a moment, everything felt surreal. Thomas was still watching her closely, waiting for her to respond. She opened her mouth to speak but found that no words would come. She wasn't sure what to say. Should she demand more answers? Should she ask him to tell her everything, to unravel the mystery? Or should she get up and walk out of the room, pretending none of this had ever happened? Before she could decide, Thomas stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "You need to understand, Lena," he said, his voice now laced with urgency. "I'm not trying to scare you, I'm trying to help you. But if you don't act fast, you'll be caught in something far bigger than you ever imagined. And those people out there, they won't stop until they get what they want." Lena's thoughts were spinning. She was in over her head. This was no longer about getting a job. This was about her mother's past, about a legacy she had never known and never wanted to be part of. But now, it seemed as if there was no way to escape it. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Thomas's expression softened slightly, as though he finally saw the fear in her eyes. "You don't have to do this alone. I can help you, but you have to trust me." Lena looked at him, torn. Trust him? A man who had only just met her and was telling her that her mother had been involved in something dangerous? She didn't know if she could trust anyone at this point. But what choice did she have? Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "This is bigger than you think. And if you want to survive, you need to make a choice right now. Will you keep that ring, or will you hand it over to those who want it?" Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at the ring on her finger. The choice was hers, but whatever she decided, nothing would ever be the same again. Lena stood in the middle of the office, Thomas's words echoing in her mind. She had always prided herself on making logical, clear decisions. But in this moment, everything felt foreign, like the ground beneath her was shifting and she had no idea where it was taking her. The ring on her finger felt heavier than it ever had, as if it were drawing her into a world she was never meant to enter. The weight of Thomas's revelation sat heavily on her chest. Your mother was involved with dangerous people. It wasn't just some vague threat, it was real. Her mother's ring, a piece of jewelry she had worn since her childhood, was now a target. And Thomas Blake, a man she had only just met, was the one who seemed to know more about her mother's life than she did. Lena felt a growing sense of unease. Had her mother left these secrets deliberately, or had she been running from something her entire life? Lena's thoughts whirled, and as she glanced at Thomas, she couldn't ignore the dark intensity in his eyes. This wasn't just about a job anymore. It wasn't even just about the ring. It was about her mother's past. She wasn't sure if she should feel angry, betrayed, or terrified, but she felt all three, swirling in her gut. Thomas stepped back, giving her space, but his presence was still heavy in the room. His posture had shifted, no longer the confident CEO, but a man who knew more about this situation than he was willing to let on. "I can help you, Lena," he repeated, his voice softer now, as though trying to offer her a lifeline. "But you need to understand what you're dealing with. There are people who will stop at nothing to get that ring. And if they find out you have it," he trailed off, letting the silence speak the rest of his warning. Lena tried to collect her thoughts. She knew her mother had kept her life private, but to this extent? To hide something this dangerous from her own daughter? What kind of person had Lena's mother been, really? All of this time, Lena had thought she knew her, but now, the pieces of the puzzle seemed to be falling apart, and she wasn't sure what she was left with. "What's going to happen if I keep the ring?" Lena finally asked, her voice steady, but there was a flicker of vulnerability beneath the surface. "What will you do? What will they do?" Thomas's gaze softened for just a moment before hardening again. "I'm not here to threaten you, Lena. I'm telling you the truth because I want to help you avoid what's coming. There's a history here, a legacy tied to that ring, one that your mother left behind without ever telling you. People who have been searching for it for years won't care that you're new to all of this. They won't care that you're just trying to live your life. They'll come after you." Lena felt the familiar ache in her chest, the desire to understand, to know what her mother had kept hidden. Her mind struggled to balance the weight of what Thomas was telling her with the need to honor her mother's memory. She didn't want to believe that her mother had been part of something sinister, but the evidence was mounting, piece by piece. The ring was central to it all. But why now? Why after all these years had Thomas suddenly appeared in her life, and why had he taken such an interest in the ring? She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than he was letting on. The nagging suspicion that Thomas Blake wasn't just some CEO trying to help a young woman in distress was hard to ignore. Was he simply looking for answers, or was he involved in this dark past, too? His motives were still unclear, and Lena wasn't sure she could trust him. As she pondered these questions, her phone buzzed on the table. Lena glanced at it, one new message. The name on the screen was unfamiliar, unknown caller. A cold shiver ran down her spine, and she felt her pulse quicken. What if this was the start of something bigger? What if this message had something to do with the ring? She hesitated, unsure whether to open it, but her curiosity got the better of her. She unlocked the phone and read the text. "We know you have it. Don't think you're safe. We're coming for you." Lena's breath caught in her throat. Her entire body tensed as the words hit her like a blow. She dropped the phone back onto the table, her hands shaking. There was no doubt about it now, this wasn't some twisted coincidence. She had been pulled into something far darker than she ever imagined. Someone was watching her. Someone new. Thomas didn't seem surprised when he noticed her reaction. Instead, his eyes narrowed, his lips pressed together in a thin line. He walked over and picked up her phone, reading the message for himself. When he looked up, there was no hint of pity in his expression. "I warned you," he said quietly. "This is just the beginning. Whoever sent that message is one of the people I've been trying to protect you from." Lena's mind was racing. How had they found out so quickly? Was Thomas involved with these people? Was he just using her to get to the ring? She shot him a sharp look, trying to gauge whether she could trust him. He didn't seem to flinch, though, his face set in a grim determination. "I can help you," he repeated, but this time, his voice was firmer, almost commanding. "But I need you to listen to me. The people after you are ruthless. They'll do anything to get their hands on that ring. You have to make a choice now, Lena. You can either hand it over and walk away from this, or you can try to fight, and I'll help you." Lena's thoughts spun faster. Fight? Fight who? She wasn't a fighter. She was just a regular woman who had never asked for any of this. And yet, here she was, in the middle of a mess she didn't understand, with a ring she had no idea how to control. Was she really prepared to dive deeper into this unknown world, to risk her safety and everything she knew for a piece of jewelry that now seemed like a curse? The weight of the decision bore down on her. But more than that, it was the growing sense of dread that seemed to wrap around her, tightening with each passing second. She had no idea who she could trust, not even Thomas. But one thing was certain, whatever she decided, there was no turning back. Lena stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. Thomas's words swirled in her mind, mixing with the cold, unrelenting fear creeping up her spine. "I can help you." The phrase repeated like a mantra, but the more she thought about it, the less comforting it seemed. Thomas was offering her protection, but at what cost? What was his real interest in this ring? How much of this world was he really part of? Every instinct told her that there was something more at play, something far darker than he was willing to admit. The air in the room felt heavy, stifling. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second passing like a countdown to something inevitable. The message on her phone was still lodged in her brain, like a scar. "We know you have it. Don't think you're safe. We're coming for you." Every word felt like it was burning into her memory. She couldn't shake the image of someone out there, watching her every move. The vulnerability was overwhelming. She glanced up at Thomas, his face now shadowed with an intensity she hadn't noticed before. His posture was taut, his eyes scanning the room, clearly waiting for her to make her decision. But how could she? There was no clear path forward. There was only uncertainty, darkness, and the terrible weight of the ring that she still wore on her finger. The room seemed to close in around her. She felt her breath catch, her chest tightening. The thought of handing the ring over, giving it to whoever these people were, whoever had sent the message, seemed impossible. Her mother had never given it to her for a reason. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a legacy, something that meant far more than she could understand. It was her only connection to the mother she had lost. Could she really part with that, even if it meant her safety? But the other option, fighting back, felt like stepping into a world she knew nothing about. A world of danger and deceit. A world where people played games with lives, and no one came out unscathed. Lena didn't know if she was brave enough to step into that world. But she also didn't know if she could live with herself if she just ran and let these mysterious people take the ring. Her mind raced, a storm of conflicting thoughts crashing against each other. In that moment, her phone buzzed again. Another message. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked it, heart hammering in her chest. "Time's running out. We know where you are. We're coming for the ring. No more hiding." Panic flooded her veins. The message was clear. They were close. Whoever they weren't just threats, they were people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Lena's stomach dropped. She could feel the sense of urgency rising within her, pushing her to make a choice. Before she could process the full weight of the situation, the door to Thomas's office swung open. Lena's breath caught in her throat as a man stepped into the room, tall, sharp features, dark sunglasses even though it was well past noon. His presence was overwhelming. He didn't belong here. His suit was impeccable, but the aura around him felt like it had been forged in the darkest corners of the earth. Thomas stiffened as the man entered, his eyes narrowing. He stood up quickly, but his body language shifted, less confident now, more guarded. There was no mistaking the sudden tension in the air. Whoever this man was, he wasn't here for a friendly chat. "Thomas," the man said, his voice low and gravelly, "we need to talk. Now." Lena felt her pulse spike. She didn't know who this man was, but she could feel the weight of his presence. It was like the temperature in the room had dropped a few degrees. The man's gaze flicked to her, and a slight smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. But there was nothing welcoming about it. "Who is this?" Lena managed to ask, her voice shaky, as she looked back and forth between Thomas and the newcomer. "This is Michael," Thomas said stiffly, his eyes still locked on the man in the doorway. "He's not someone you need to worry about." The words didn't ring true. There was no convincing tone in his voice, no calm assurance. Instead, it was laced with something else, fear, maybe, or something far darker. Michael's smirk widened, and he took a step forward, his eyes narrowing on Lena. "Oh, I think she needs to worry," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "Because we both know what's at stake now. And I don't think either of you fully understand what's coming." Lena's stomach lurched. She instinctively clenched her fists, her body tensing with the sudden surge of adrenaline. It felt as though the walls were closing in on her from all sides. The weight of the ring on her finger was unbearable, as if it were pulsing with some kind of energy, calling out to these people, whoever they were. Michael's gaze never left her, and she could feel the intensity of his scrutiny, like he was seeing straight through her. "You're not ready for this," he said coldly. "The ring? It's not a trinket. It's a key to something much bigger than you realize. And you're about to find out just how much bigger." Thomas stepped forward, his face set, his hands slightly raised in an attempt to defuse the situation. "Michael, please. We don't need to do this. There's a better way. We don't need to escalate." But Michael cut him off, his voice sharp. "The time for talking is over." He turned back to Lena, his eyes now gleaming with something cold, something that sent a shiver up her spine. "You're not just in danger anymore. You're the target." Lena's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, the weight of his words sinking in. They were coming for her. But why? What did they want? What were they willing to do to get the ring? Her body screamed at her to run, but where would she go? Who could she trust? The only thing she knew for certain was that the longer she stayed in this room, the closer these people would get. And soon, she would have no choice but to make a decision that could change everything. She looked at Thomas, his face now pale, and then back at Michael, whose expression had shifted into something almost predatory. It was clear now that the decision wasn't hers alone to make. Whatever game had been set into motion, it was out of her hands. The stakes were rising, and there was no turning back. The tension in the room was palpable, and Lena could feel every heartbeat reverberate through her chest. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think clearly, and every instinct told her to run. But where could she go? These people knew who she was, where she was, and now, they were closing in. Michael's cold gaze never wavered, and Thomas seemed paralyzed, caught between a force that clearly outmatched him and a responsibility he couldn't escape. Lena's mind raced as her fingers absent-mindedly brushed against the ring, the familiar weight doing little to comfort her. The ring her mother had worn for years, a piece of jewelry she had always taken for granted, was now at the center of this dark, spiraling web. What was it about this ring? Why had her mother kept it so hidden? And why was it worth everything, her safety, her life, being threatened? Michael, sensing her growing anxiety, took another step closer, his expression colder than before. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but sharp as a blade. "The ring isn't just a family heirloom. It's tied to something much, much bigger than you could ever imagine. It's part of a legacy your mother never told you about. A legacy that has drawn the attention of people who control far more than you think." Lena recoiled, her head spinning. "What do you mean? What legacy? What people?" Her voice cracked, desperation creeping into the words. Michael glanced at Thomas, then back at her, his lips curling into a sinister smile. "Let's just say that your mother wasn't who you thought she was. She was part of an organization that controls everything. Politics, power, money. And that ring? It's the key to unlocking a treasure trove of secrets. Secrets that could change everything. Lena's mind screamed in disbelief. Her mother, a part of some shadowy organization? It was too much to take in, too much to comprehend. The woman she had loved, the woman who had raised her with such care, could she have really been living a double life? What had her mother done to get involved in such dangerous dealings? Suddenly, a voice from the doorway broke through the thickening tension. A woman stepped into the office, her silhouette framed by the dim light from the hallway. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She didn't recognize her, but there was something about her that felt unsettlingly familiar. The woman's sharp features were framed by dark, slicked-back hair, and her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, locked onto Lena immediately. "Michael, I told you this wasn't the right way," the woman said, her voice smooth but laced with authority. She moved into the room with precision, like a predator circling her prey. "We can't force her. She needs to choose." Lena felt a chill run through her body as she watched the woman approach. There was something about her, something she couldn't quite place, that sent a shiver down her spine. As the woman drew closer, Lena noticed a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture. The woman's hand was resting on her own ring, the same design as the one Lena wore. Her stomach dropped. It couldn't be a coincidence. Michael turned to the woman, his jaw tightening. "You don't get it, Isabel. She's holding the key. We can't wait any longer." He looked back at Lena. "We've been searching for her, for that ring, for years. Now, we're finally close, and we can't afford to let her slip away." Isabel's eyes flashed with something, anger, frustration, before she exhaled slowly, composing herself. "The more you push, the more she'll resist. If you want her to be part of this, Michael, you need to give her the chance to decide for herself. You can't force someone into this life." Lena's head was spinning. Isabel's words, the fact that she was wearing the same ring, what was happening? The pieces were coming together too fast, too violently. She didn't know who these people were or what they wanted from her, but one thing was clear: they weren't just after the ring anymore. They were after her. And if she refused them, if she tried to run, she had no idea how far they would go to make sure she couldn't escape. Thomas, still standing off to the side, watched the exchange with growing unease. "Lena, you don't have to do this. You don't have to be a part of this," he said, his voice strained but earnest. "You don't have to follow in your mother's footsteps. I can help you walk away from all of this." But his words felt hollow, like an echo of something that had already passed. How could she walk away from something she didn't understand? And even if she did, would they let her? Would these people, these dangerous individuals who had spent years chasing after her mother's legacy, just let her walk away? The room felt like it was closing in again. Lena felt suffocated by the choices laid out before her, each one darker than the last. They were giving her an ultimatum, but neither choice felt right. They wanted her to join them, to be part of a world that she didn't belong in, a world of power, manipulation, and secrets. Or, they would hunt her down, and the ring would be taken from her, along with everything she had left. I can't," Lena's voice cracked, and she felt a tear slip down her cheek. "I don't know what to do." Michael's eyes softened for a moment, though there was still something cold behind them. "You don't have a choice, Lena. That's the problem. You're already in this. And if you don't take control, you'll be swept away in the storm your mother left behind." Lena's pulse quickened, her heart pounding in her ears. The pieces were falling into place, but none of it made sense. Who was she? She was just a woman trying to build a life for herself, not some player in a dangerous game of power and greed. But now, she was caught in the middle of something far bigger than herself. Isabel stepped forward then, placing a hand on Lena's shoulder in a way that felt more like a threat than a gesture of comfort. "There's no turning back now," she said softly, her voice almost kind, like she was speaking to a child. "This is who you are. This is who your mother made you." Lena's eyes locked onto Isabel's. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Isabel wasn't just here to bring her into the fold. There was something deeper, something darker lurking in her intentions. And suddenly, it hit her: what if Isabel wasn't just trying to recruit her? What if she was the one who had been hunting Lena all along? The realization sent a wave of terror through her chest. Everything had just changed, and Lena wasn't sure she could trust anyone anymore. The storm was coming, and she was caught right in the eye of it. Lena's mind was racing. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her feet felt glued to the floor. The weight of the ring on her finger was unbearable now, as if it had become a symbol of all the choices she had made without fully understanding them. As Isabel's grip tightened on her shoulder, Lena felt a knot of panic grow in her chest. This wasn't just a confrontation over a ring. This was a battle over her very existence. But then, something inside her shifted. A spark of clarity broke through the fog of fear and uncertainty. She had spent years trying to build a life, trying to escape the shadows of her mother's past. And now, here she was, being pulled back into it, just when she thought she had broken free. She couldn't let them control her. She wouldn't let them define who she was. "Enough," Lena said, her voice shaking but strong. She pulled away from Isabel's grasp and took a step back. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she was determined now. "I don't care about this legacy. I don't care about any of it." Michael's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening in frustration. "You don't have a choice, Lena. The ring, it's already bound to you. The power it holds, it's part of you now. You can't walk away from that." Lena's hands trembled as she held up the ring, staring at the delicate band that had caused so much chaos in her life. She thought about her mother, about how she had lived her life in the shadow of secrets and hidden truths. But Lena wasn't her mother. She wasn't going to let this ring dictate her life. Not now, not ever. "Maybe I don't need to be part of your world," she said, her voice growing steadier. "Maybe the answer isn't to fight you, but to let you fight each other." Isabel's face hardened, and Michael looked taken aback. Neither of them had expected Lena to take such a stand, especially with the weight of the situation bearing down on her. But in that moment, Lena knew that the only way out was to make them question everything they thought they knew. "I don't need your approval," Lena continued. "If the ring has power, then it's mine to control, not yours. And I'm not giving it to anyone. Not now, not ever." The silence in the room was deafening, and for a brief moment, the tension hung thick in the air. Michael and Isabel exchanged glances, trying to assess whether Lena was bluffing. But there was something in her eyes, a fierce determination, that told them she wasn't. She had made up her mind. Suddenly, the door to the office burst open, and another figure stepped in, Thomas. His face was pale, but his eyes were wide with resolve. "Lena, you can't do this alone," he said, his voice urgent. "They won't stop. They'll come after you, after both of us." Lena turned to him, her chest tight. "What do you mean? What's happening?" Thomas's eyes darted between Isabel and Michael, and he took a hesitant step toward her. "You're right. They won't stop. But there's something you don't know. Something that changes everything." Before she could ask, Thomas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to Lena, who took it cautiously, her heart racing as she unfolded it. The words on the paper were short but clear: "The ring is a decoy." Lena's stomach churned. What was this supposed to mean? A decoy? But before she could process the meaning of the words, Thomas continued. "Your mother's real legacy," he said softly, "was never in the ring. It was in the research she did. The connections she made. The people she helped build." Lena's confusion deepened. "What are you talking about?" Thomas stepped forward, his voice lowering to a whisper as he glanced at Isabel and Michael. "Your mother wasn't just a part of the organization, they were afraid of her. She knew things, Lena. Things they didn't want getting out. The ring was just the last piece of a much bigger puzzle. A puzzle that involves you." Lena's breath caught in her throat. "No. That can't be. She was just my mother. She didn't want any part of this. She couldn't have known." Thomas shook his head. "She did, Lena. She knew more than you could possibly imagine. The truth is, your mother was trying to protect you from them. But the ring, it's a symbol. Not of power, but of control." Lena looked down at the ring again, her mind racing. Was everything she had believed about her mother's death a lie? Had her mother known she was in danger, but never told her? She had always assumed her mother's life was simple, that she had left behind the world of secrets. But now, everything was in question. "I'm telling you this because you don't have to follow in her footsteps," Thomas said urgently. "You can break free. But you have to trust me. You can't let them manipulate you. They don't know the full truth. And they won't stop until they think they have it." Lena's mind reeled. She could feel the walls closing in, the weight of the ring growing heavier by the second. Michael and Isabel were still watching her, their patience wearing thin. She knew she couldn't stand still any longer. The only way to survive was to break free. With a sudden, unexpected move, Lena yanked the ring from her finger and tossed it to the floor. The shock in the room was instant, and for a split second, no one moved. Michael's eyes flashed with fury, and Isabel took a step back, as if the very act of throwing the ring had shattered some invisible barrier. But then, as Lena watched them, something unexpected happened. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shake, the air thickening with energy. For a brief, fleeting moment, everything around them felt like it was coming undone. The ring lay on the floor, its glow fading, but its power lingering. It wasn't the key to unlocking power, it was the key to unlocking truth. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the tension broke. Isabel and Michael exchanged a look that spoke volumes, a look of realization, a realization that maybe, just maybe, they had underestimated Lena. She was no longer the pawn they thought she was. And they had no idea what she would do next. The room remained tense, a charged silence hanging in the air. Lena's hand hovered in the space where the ring had just been, the weight of her decision settling in her chest. She had done it, taken control, broken free from the expectations that had held her for so long. But she knew it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Isabel and Michael were still standing there, their eyes narrowing, processing the unexpected turn of events. Isabel's voice cut through the stillness, low and dangerous. You think you've won, don't you? Lena's heart pounded, but she held her ground. I don't think I've won, she said quietly, meeting Isabel's gaze. But I know I'm not playing your game anymore. Michael's lips twisted into a sneer, his anger simmering just below the surface. You've made a huge mistake, Lena. You have no idea what you've unleashed. For a brief moment, Lena felt the weight of his words, but she refused to back down. She had been living in fear for too long, allowing them to manipulate her with their lies and half-truths. If this was the price of freedom, of taking control over her own life, then she was ready to face whatever came next. Before she could respond, Thomas stepped forward again, his voice firm. Lena's right. You're playing a different game now. One where you can't control her anymore. The look of shock on Michael and Isabel's faces was almost satisfying. They hadn't expected Thomas to take her side, to stand against them. But there he was, standing tall beside Lena, no longer an outsider in their web of manipulation. Isabel glared at Thomas, her eyes seething with venom. You think you can save her? You've seen what happens to people who try to get in our way. Thomas didn't flinch. I'm not trying to save her. She can save herself. Lena's pulse quickened as she absorbed his words. It was true. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was the one in control. The realization hit her like a wave, she could shape her own destiny. It wasn't about running away from her past, but embracing the future she could create, free from the chains that had bound her for so long. As Isabel and Michael exchanged heated whispers, Lena turned toward the ring, still resting on the floor. She hadn't been able to see it for what it truly was until now. It was just a symbol, an object that had been used to control, to manipulate. The real power had never been in the ring, it had always been within her. She had inherited more than just a piece of jewelry. She had inherited strength, resilience, and a legacy that didn't have to define her. Slowly, she bent down and picked up the ring. This time, though, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like nothing more than a trinket, something that had once held power over her, but now only served as a reminder of everything she had overcome. She turned to face Michael and Isabel once more, the weight of their gazes burning into her. I'm not scared of you, Lena said, her voice steady. You can't control me anymore. And you can't control the truth. Isabel's expression faltered for just a moment, and it was enough. In that fleeting moment, Lena saw it, the doubt, the uncertainty that had crept into the faces of both Isabel and Michael. They had underestimated her. And now, they were about to realize just how badly they had miscalculated. Lena turned to Thomas, the one person who had believed in her when she didn't even believe in herself. He had helped her see the truth, helped her understand that she didn't have to play by their rules. That she could make her own choices. She owed him more than words could express. Let's go, Lena said, her voice filled with a quiet but fierce resolve. It's over. Thomas nodded, his eyes reflecting the pride he felt for her. Together, they turned and walked toward the door. But just as Lena reached for the handle, she stopped. Isabel's voice echoed from behind them, sharp and full of venom. You'll regret this, Lena. You'll come crawling back. They always do. Lena hesitated for a split second, but she didn't look back. No, Isabel. I won't. Not this time. With that, she opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, Thomas right behind her. As the door swung shut behind them, she felt a sense of finality. A door had closed. And in that moment, she knew she was no longer the person who had walked in just hours earlier. Outside, the city buzzed with life, oblivious to the intense drama that had just unfolded behind closed doors. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the skyline, and for the first time in a long while, Lena felt like she was breathing freely again. Thomas glanced at her, his expression softening. "You did it. You're free." Lena smiled, a genuine smile that felt like the first real smile she had given in years. "I am, aren't I?" As they walked away from the building, Lena could feel the weight of the ring still in her pocket, but it didn't feel like a burden anymore. It was just a reminder. A reminder that no matter how powerful the forces against her were, she had the strength to overcome them. And that, above all, was her true inheritance. The days ahead would be challenging, of course. The road to freedom was never without obstacles. But for the first time, Lena was ready. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was embracing her future. The future was hers to shape. And no one, not even the ones who had tried to control her, could take that away from her. As they disappeared into the growing twilight, Lena felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey was far from over, but she knew one thing for sure: she was no longer afraid. She had chosen her own path. And it was one that no one, no ring, no legacy, no manipulation, could ever take from her.